today. I'm Dr. Melanie Reed, Director of CADRE, and this webinar was created in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and designed to be useful to IEP facilitators and SEA staff overseeing IEP facilitation programs. We hope you find the information instructive in your efforts to deliver facilitated IEP meetings. Next slide, please. A few technical notes. Great. A few technical notes. This is an open conversation, and your input and participation is welcome. Please see the handout section in your control panel for a copy of the PowerPoint. Your phone lines have been muted to minimize interruptions, and you can use the hand raise feature in the control panel to be recognized, and we will unmute your line. You can also enter any questions or comments into the question box, not the chat box, on your control panel, and I will be monitoring questions from the question box, and we'll share those with the presenters. We are recording today's presentation, and we'll be sharing it on our website. If you want to ask questions anonymously, you can do so in the question box. Questions in the question box will be read by me, and I will not identify any names when I pose those questions to our presenters. And finally, your feedback is really very, very important to us, so we ask that you respond to the brief survey at the end of this forum today. Next slide, please. And now for our legal disclaimer. The information shared in this forum is not intended to serve as, nor should it replace, legal advice. Opinions expressed today's presenters are not represented to be an official or unofficial interpretation of legal guidance from the U.S. Department of Education or from CADRE, and the services of a duly licensed attorney in your state should be sought in responding to individual situations of legal implications. With that, we are extremely excited and happy to introduce Robin O'Shea and Cassie Velasquez. Cassie and Robin are managing partners at Key to Ed. Both are nationally recognized public speakers on the subjects of IEP facilitation, conflict resolution, conflict management, and have over 25 years of experience in special education. We are very fortunate for their willingness to share their knowledge with us today about facilitating IEP meetings during a pandemic. So, Cassie and Robin, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, Melanie. Hi, everyone.
Well, hi, everybody. I know that those of you who know, we kind of perused the attendee list, and we saw some really familiar names there. So we were hoping to say we're glad to see you, but I guess all you can do is see us, and we will just have a picture of you in our brain. So you know how we love to reconnect with our friends and family out there facilitating. So we look forward to this discussion, though. What we think we will do, what we'd like to propose, is that we give a brief overview of things that have come up for us that we've been consulting through clients, some of you guys that are in the audience right now, as well as others, and then really encourage this to be a dynamic and discussion, a Q&A of everybody really working through what they're seeing out there and what they would like some answers to, or just even some discussions among and between all of us. I hope that works for everybody. We've got different roles. Cassie and I will be working through different slides, and then the back-end team will be handling, as Melanie said, the discussions and the questions, and they'll break in, which will be difficult because you know what talkers we are, to our discussion and say, we've got a really good question, let's interrupt this and deal with it. So that's kind of how the layout will work. Hopefully that will work for everybody. Anything to add, Cass?
No, just that I was going to say I'm Cassie and that's Robin. We go by Cassavin, for those of you that don't know us. So that's it. Let's get started.
All right, let's get started. So the first two bullets here, you see virtual format and waiting room options. And this came to us in the question of how do we collaborate virtually? And great question. I know many of you already know many of your formats that you're using. And what we would like to acknowledge here today, just to start off and kind of give the baseline, is that we're not going to promote one format over the other. Certainly, you know, if you know Key to Ed and you've been online with us, we use Zoom mostly. However, because of this, we've had to educate ourselves and sort of research other formats. And the relief is many have some of the same options that are really good. So we're going to give some general tips, and do know that as you jot things down, that if we either need to work through how those look on the formats that you're using, we can, or we can guide you to their help rooms or anything technical that way. But just so that you know, we're going to generally instance of how are we collaborating virtually. So with that being said, the next bullet, waiting room options. And you had a little taste of this today when you joined, although we were in the waiting room. So if you're going to facilitate a neutral facilitation, which is the audience in this webinar, I love the idea of a waiting room or a lobby. Those two words are used interchangeably in this virtual format. And what that is it gives the person who has the designee of creating the virtual format, so the person who's created it and hosting, and that's an important component, who's hosting the format, to actually set up a time prior to the beginning of the meeting where people can congregate. I love this option for facilitation neutrally because you're not put in that awkward situation of having to make conversation with participants prior to the meeting. That's something that if you've been through our training or you're just trained elsewhere, I'm sure they've talked about remaining neutral. You don't, whether you've done work ahead of time with all the parties, you still don't want to get into a situation where you're chit-chatting about something that may have come up prior to the meeting. So this gives that great option. Now I'm going to switch to the next slide. Here's an example of a slide or a waiting room slide that somebody sent us that they use. And they used this opportunity, as you can see on the lower corner, where they have some instructions for the attendees, like click on tools and then make sure your mouse is working or your webcam is on or you're not muted or you are muted. Just little details that maybe would take some time away from your meeting that you don't want to take away from. Because as we know, especially in the neutral facilitation, time can get away from us and can be very long. So we want to make sure things are efficient and effective. Another idea that has come across, well, I'll come back to that. Here's another example of what it can look like either on Zoom. You can see to the left of your screen, this is just some ideas that you can put up in your meeting room of how I'm going to ask questions with the virtual hand, how I can agree or come to consensus, yes or no. If I need a break, I love the little coffee cup. That's a little icon for a break. Or there's even more options, like we need to extend time or our time is coming to an end. So that's one example of things you can put in your meeting room. Or on the other side, you can see that this is some logistics that they put up for the WebEx room. One other thing that I didn't give you an example of, but I think that you guys can kind of think about is posting your agendas, outcomes, and norms in your meeting room. And I really liked this idea because, as you know, we like to come to an agreement of the agenda so that we can follow an efficient guided meeting. If you have them posted in your waiting room, people can start to look that agenda over. Now, certainly Cassie and I are going to promote that you send all of that to your participants ahead of time. But in the event that they didn't have the time to look at it, this gives them some time to peruse the order of the information that's going to come out. So that's just another idea that might help you make your meeting efficient.
Okay. So just like we talk about in our training where we do setup and conduct the meeting and follow through, we've kind of organized this presentation, the short presentation, that in the same way. So in looking at the setup piece, one of the questions that came up was, what procedures do you need to develop for a successful virtual IEP meeting? And when Robin and I were talking about this, we kind of came up with the fact that there's two types of procedures, really. You have your logistical stuff. So procedures that need to be handled in your setup, like who has the roles of doing things. And we're going to get to roles in just a minute and more specifically, but those would be more logistical setups. How are you going to communicate during the meeting? What does the collaboration look like during the meeting and things like that? We'll talk about those in our presentation as we move through. But the question was, how do you exchange information? So when we talked about this, we really thought the same way you would exchange information in a traditional IEP meeting would be the same way you would exchange information virtually, because hopefully it's done ahead of time. We know it's best practice to send home a draft IEP beforehand so that everyone has an opportunity to look it over. We've gotten input from the family. The same would be true in a virtual meeting. The hope, though, is that all team members, as we know, are coming prepared, because when everybody's coming prepared, we know that the collaboration and the negotiation of the meeting is a lot more successful. But then the next question was, how do you exchange documents? Well, exchanging documents prior to or exchanging documents during the meeting kind of ties into roles. So I'm going to talk about those together. Depending on the type of system you're using, whether it's Zoom, WebEx, Skype, Teams, all of the different types of programs, doesn't matter. All of those, you can share documents during your virtual meeting. The host of the meeting, in our experience, is the one that has it runs more seamlessly for the host to be the one sharing the documents. They kind of have control of the screen. That gives you, as the state facilitator, the opportunity to really focus on everyone that you're seeing in the meeting, so that you can watch body language, so that you can watch, which body language is a tough one, because really all you're going to be able to see is their facial expressions. But that's what you need to be looking for making sure that there isn't anybody sitting silent in the meeting, that everybody's participating, that people are feeling valued and heard. That really, as a state facilitator, is your role. So having other people on the team doing the sharing of the documents is critical. Deciding beforehand about the roles, who's going to be the scribe. Now, you're not going to know the team members possibly, or all of the team members sitting around or on the virtual meeting, sitting around the table, right? You might not know those people, so it would be hard for you to say, you be the scribe, you be the timekeeper. Those are the things that should be done up and set up prior to your meeting. Who's going to be the scribe? Who's going to be the timekeeper? Who's going to be responsible for listening for action plan items that might come up and be jotting those down? Who's going to be managing the technology? As you saw, Melanie is going to be doing things like watching for hand raises and interrupting with questions, so that we as the presenters can focus on the presentation. Same is true in a virtual IEP meeting. You as the state facilitator are focusing on managing the meeting, making sure that everybody's participating and so on. So it's impossible for you to do all of those other things. Just like we say in the traditional sense of an IEP meeting, not one person can do all the work. But having that done ahead of time and set up ahead of time is critical to helping things move more smoothly. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, the question came up, how do group norms change in a virtual IEP meeting? And so we gave that a lot of thought, and what we came up with was that the group norms that we at Key2Ed use can be the same norms that you use in a virtual IEP meeting. It's just in how maybe they're presented could be different. So let's look at a couple examples, like communicate clearly and listen carefully, okay? This would be the same in a virtual setting, but perhaps you need to gain agreement on how you're going to communicate clearly. What does that look like? How are we going to interrupt one another to be able to speak when we're in this virtual setting? So that would be something to set up with your team and gain agreement on ahead of time. Are you going to have people hold up their hand to be able to communicate and be heard? Are you going to have a button that the system that you're using where you can raise your hand? Those types of things, that could be embedded in your norms. So there's no reason to reinvent the wheel or make more work for yourself to come up with virtual norms. It's just in how they're presented that you can make them effective. Respect the views of others. That would be the same on a virtual meeting as it would be in a traditional meeting. But respectful might be mute your computer when you're not talking so that you're not getting background noise and things like that. Share your views willingly. Again, in a virtual setting, how does that look so that not everybody's talking over one another? As the state facilitator, these are things I would want to be thinking about ahead of time so that when I'm explaining the norms, I have a very clear answer to those questions to try to gain agreement so that we can move through the meeting more efficiently. Honor time limits and stay on task, that's one. Will you be taking breaks? If you're going to take breaks in your meeting, what does that look like? Do you mute yourself? Do you turn off your camera? Do you establish to make sure everybody comes back? How do we know everybody's back when your camera comes back on? Things like that. So to answer the question, how do you change your norms for a virtual IEP? I don't think so. It's just in how you present them. But I'm looking forward to hearing from more discussion from everybody. All right, let's go to the agenda. So another question came up. What should be changed or added to the agenda for a virtual IEP? We gave that a lot of thought as well. And we don't feel like there should necessarily be anything changed because, first of all, we know that present levels, goals, and services follows federal law. So we're not messing with that. And how are we going to be showing our documents within those areas, keeping the group memory and all those things we're going to talk about as we move through this. But your welcome section would be the same depending on whether you put your outcomes, agendas, and norms in your waiting room, as Robin had said, or you've got the host of the meeting perhaps has them posted and you gain your agreements on them. We had a state facilitator share with us that in her facilitation, she made the outcomes, agendas, and norms forms with little boxes so that the host could put an A in the little box after they gained agreement. We thought that was a fabulous idea and a way to keep it visual. Goals and present levels, goals and services would be the same, but who has the role of keeping the group memory? Who's being that scribe? What does that look like? I think all of those things are part of setup that you as the facilitator would want to work through with the case manager or the host or whoever is handling the technology piece of the computer. Part of the ending is paperwork. And we have a slide coming up in a little bit about follow through because a lot of questions come up with how do you handle the paperwork and so on. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So Robin? Oh, record or not? That was another question. That's right. Should virtual IEP meetings be recorded or taped? And how should that be handled prior to the meeting in the setup? That question came in. Really, the answer that we can come up with is whoever is in charge at the district level or the LEA or whomever would need to be familiar with the state laws. And keeping in mind that this is not only audio taping now, we're also videotaping. So when we're recording, there's two different issues there to be thinking of. So that would be a procedural issue that would need to be handled at the state or district level. All right, Robin, now take it away.
Actually, this is Melanie. Robin, I'm going to jump in for just a second. There was a question, and Cassie, I think it was directed at something you had mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Are you suggesting that the host and the facilitator are not the same person? So, and what is the role for the co-facilitator?
Okay, good question. I did say that in our experience and talking to other people that have been facilitating, the state facilitator and the host should be different, or it's worked out better for them when it was different, because it's too much to managing all of the people, making sure everybody feels valued and heard, making sure everybody's participating in that, as well as trying to flip screens and show different things. So working closely with the host could do that. Now, I love the idea of the host being the co-facilitator. I think that is a wonderful suggestion, and I think that that could work out beautifully because the two of you then are managing that paperwork and whatnot. Now, I would still say that because that host, I guess, actually could also be the scribe or the person keeping the group memory. That seems like that would be a wonderful working relationship. Now, when we're talking about roles, I think it would be important too to have somebody else, not the co-facilitator, but somebody else keeping the minutes, somebody else keeping, updating the IEP document. So there's different people doing those jobs, just like we would do in a traditional meeting. But I am suggesting that the actual facilitator not be the host and managing all of that as well. But the co-facilitator, I think that would be great. Rob, do you have anything?
And one thing I would add to when we worked through that problem together, and we'd love to hear from other people that either now or at the end, is because we came across the hookup or the hiccup that the district was the one that was managing the actual virtual system. And so the facilitators, especially at the state level, they're not a part of any district. So they didn't have the capacity to manage that. So then the workaround was working with the LEA in that they would be hosting, they would have to take on some hosting roles and some hosting responsibilities. So what worked best was really talking ahead of time and seeing what was comfortable for those hosting responsibilities. On some systems as well, there's an additional ability to share that hosting role. So for example, the district would still be able to host it, but they could also share controls. So perhaps, as Cassie was mentioning with the co-facilitation, if Cassie and I were facilitating together and she was from the district and I was the neutral facilitator, I may be guiding the conversation forward and using my strategic facilitation skills while she's really managing all of that paperwork and making sure that the screen is showing the appropriate things, making sure that her scribe, if that's her, can be shown. You know, that's a lot of that shared responsibility that becomes even more important in this kind of virtual world. Does that answer the question, or do we need to dig in deeper?
Well, Robin, this is Amanda, just chiming in. It looks like Christy Ernst, she's the one who asked the question. She has her hand raised. Actually, she's had it raised. So I'm going to unmute you, Christy, just so you can either follow up with your question or jump in. So go ahead, Christy. You should be able to talk now.
Hi, girls.
Hi, so good to hear from you.
Basically, my question revolved around that little message that I sent, because we met yesterday and we talked about, it seems like those of us who have already completed a virtual facilitation have done it where the facilitator is the host and the co-facilitator is the co-host. You guys correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's what I was hearing. I haven't done one yet, so we're just questioning logistically which works out best.
I think that it is going to be dependent on the type of system that the district is using and whether or not you as the facilitator are familiar with that system and how that works. As we said, in our experience, what we've heard from other state facilitators is when the district hosts it and sends out the meeting notice and gets everybody on there and make sure the technology is all working, has worked well for them so that they can focus solely on managing the meeting process, moving the group through the agenda and so on. So I don't think there's any right or wrong answers. It's really what's your comfort level and what's going to work best for you based on your knowledge of the virtual system they're using.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yes.
And this is Melanie. There were just a couple of comments related, so I'll just share them. One person says they'd heard the role host called a producer. I don't know if that's something that's in a different platform, but that was an interesting comment. And then in Illinois, we've been using 2 state facilitators. One is the lead and the other is the co-facilitator. And we set up host and co-host roles with the district and both facilitators. So just a couple comments.
Love that. Love that information and that feedback. And yes, I would say that the lingo for the different virtual settings is just that. Sometimes it's a host, sometimes it's called a producer, but the same idea. Who's managing and has control of the screen is what host or producer is meaning to us. That's in reference to how we're using those words. So, all right.
And I just want to shout out to Illinois for continuing the use of co-facilitation. As you guys know, Cassie and I co-facilitated in traditional IEP meetings, and it was so nice to have that partner. And I know not everybody can do that, which is fine as well, no problem, but that's pretty cool that you guys are continuing to do that. And I know from knowing you guys that you like that shared ownership as well. So that's really cool. Very good. Any other comments before we proceed? Okay, well, this is the one time I'll take silence as agreement. little facilitation joke there. Okay, so virtual collaboration, this ties nicely into our conversation that we're already discussing. How do you collaborate virtually? And I cannot say this enough. You'll have heard me say this if you know me, and probably we will say it again and again throughout this discussion. Please try to make your collaboration visual. It is absolutely the one thing that will help people to interact is when we can make things visual. And I mean actually not just posting or sharing screens that are already pre-done documents, but live collaboration. So for example, Cassie is referring to group memory. And for those of you who might not know what that term means, we do mean that it is a visual way to make the conversation, or it's a way to make the conversation visual so that we're actually, even if you've pre-posted some, let's say in present levels, strengths and challenges, now during your facilitation, you as the facilitator are using strategic questioning, you're boomeranging ideas back to the experts in the room or to those who you feel may have the desire to discuss something. You're making sure every voice is heard. And when they're talking, your scribe is either live typing that into a document that you can see, or there's somebody on there, and I'm pointing to the back wall here. I spoke with one facilitator who had their charts on their wall, and they were scribing strengths and challenges to go into the present levels right then and there. And the feedback from that facilitation was that even though they thought the draft was very good and well prepared, the input that came out of the discussion was even more rigorous. And so they ended up adding a few tips, not a lot, because a lot of pre-work had already been done, but they were adding it and they felt that it was collaborative because people were live writing. So I can't say that enough. Another idea that came to us that we really, Cassie and I thought if we were doing this, we would like to do is create a facilitator cheat sheet that maybe you would have not shared, but for yourself, and then you would have everybody's name and role. And I mean role by, it could be their title. We typically don't like to go by titles, but just so you knew who they were. For example, Robin O'Shea, general ed teacher. So that when you were doing your subtle facilitation or overt facilitation skills and asking questions or clarification, you would also be able to kind of identify who was being a dominant talker and who maybe wasn't giving a lot of input, so that you could strategically make the decision of asking for more information and asking for clarifications based on either their role in the meeting or just the fact that you hadn't heard from them for a while. And mind you, some people are quiet, and that's okay. But at least giving them that opportunity as the facilitator, that's your role to do that, to make sure full participation is occurring. The second part of that is how do we gauge agreement and get consensus? And these two go really nicely together. They're hand in hand. You're still using your techniques to make sure that you are you're getting agreement along the way. But I would say when I was thinking this through, similar to a traditional IEP, my technique, and some of you know this, is I always describe in my facilitator role how I'm going to be looking for consensus. And I really take the time to verbally talk about it and then demonstrate it. This is critical in a virtual setting as well, because as you know, when we started, even in the waiting room and talking about how will we ask questions? How will we show that we're in agreement or not in agreement? We might have to determine that's the way we're going to gain consensus. So as my role description, I would say I'm your facilitator. And one of the things that I will do today as my job is to make sure that we're gaining agreement as we move through the agenda. I'm going to do that by asking for your agreements on these proposals. And if you agree, you can either visually raise your thumb in an agreement sign, or you can click on the thumbs up in your virtual sign. And Cassie, my co-facilitator, will be looking for those to make sure that we're not missing anybody. And certainly if you give us a thumbs down, that means to us we need to continue the conversation and perhaps clarify. And so I know that you guys heard in my description that I was strategically not saying we're not going to gain consensus, but that what are we going to do in order to ensure that we are coming to an agreement? And if we're not, then what? We're not just going to not come to an agreement, but we're going to continue to talk about it a bit and clarify and use our strategic facilitation tools to get to more information so that we can get a win-win and move on based on that agenda. So again, it's very procedural and efficient so that we have an effective but collaborative meeting. Any questions related to those two pieces, the subtle and the overt kind of facilitation techniques?
There aren't any questions in the question box.
Excellent.
Amanda,
okay,
I was going to say, are there any hands raised, Amanda?
There are not, no.
Okay.
All right, we'll keep going.
All right.
Great. So handling disruptions and interruptions. So now we've got, how do we get people to collaborate? But then some of you are already thinking and probably saying in your brain, what about those people that won't stop collaborating? What about those people that are disrupting or taking over the conversation or blurting in and disrupting that flow? So again, we go back to our facilitation tools and techniques. And if we were all able to talk to each other, I would throw out the question, what do you guys think that we set up? What tool, visual tool, can we use to stop disruptions? And of course, you're all thinking the group norms. Of course, I would use those visual tools. Now, if I had somebody that was really taking over the conversation, and I would stop the meeting, and it might be that I have to mute everybody and say, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're having a couple of people talking over each other, or we're interrupting each other, or one voice is only being heard. And as my role as the facilitator, I described early on to you that I would be the one that would make sure that everybody had a voice in the system. So you can kind of see my language, a sampling of my language of how I would interject. And of course, this would be very from subtle to more overt. And I keep using those words, but I think you probably know what I mean. The first time I had to interrupt, it would be a little softer. And then, as we all know, you may have to get more firm with your interruptions. Even that, you may have to take a break. So if somebody is just really taking over the conversation and not following those norms, I guess my next situation would be that I would call for a caucus, like we would do in a traditional facilitation. And then I would say, I need to have a conversation with some of you guys. And that's when you can decide whether you really want to use the chat box or not. And we can talk about that later. Sometimes the chat box is side conversations, which can be tricky in a neutral facilitation. So be cautious about that. But even just saying, I would like to really have a conversation so that we can take a break. It's getting a little uncomfortable and we're not following our norms. So that's how I would handle disruptions and make sure that we were going back to our agenda. If they're getting off task, number 4 says staying on track, I would still use my visual tools, guide the individuals back onto track. We're still in present levels. I know you guys want to get to goals, but we need to come to an agreement. And again, using that agreement language and using the visual agreement. Cassie, can you please put in A for agreement? It looks like we're ready to move on. That would be that, strategic moment of making sure that people are on track.
One thing, can I add something to that, Robin, really quick?
Yeah.
One thing I just thought of too is that when we introduce our norms at the beginning of a virtual meeting, and you've got a co-host or whatever we call them that's handling the flipping back between screens and whatnot, when when somebody's disruptive or somebody's interrupting or somebody's, they keep talking over one another or whatnot, having a signal or a plan with your co-facilitator to say, a look or something so that they flip back to the norm slide, that alone visually for people will just immediately say, okay, it sounds like we're talking over one another. Here's our norms again. Can we all adhere to those? Okay, move on. So the part that Robin stressed at the beginning about making things visual, even in the virtual world, is critical. It's critical. It's figuring out with whatever system you're using, how to make that happen.
Yeah, and just really being very thorough with your role description. Certainly you don't want to go overboard where people are like, let's move on, let's get started. We're too deep in the roles, but it is important for you to establish the expectation that if we're getting bogged down or if we're interrupting each other so that we can't have a collaborative or a clear discussion, it will be my role to interject. So look for me doing that, and then I'll move us on. So people are more likely, when you tell them that that's going to happen and you have to do it, they're more likely to accept the redirection.
All right.
All right.
Okay, so the final piece, we should be wrapping this up in just a couple minutes so that we can take questions and hear from all of you. The follow-through piece, there were 3 questions that came in really related to follow-through. And one was, do you still need to do a debrief? Do you have that, Robin? There we go.
Yes, there was a little
lag time there.
Yeah.
Okay. So do we still do a debrief? And our answer to that would be absolutely, we would still want to do a debrief. finding out at the end of the meeting what worked for all the participants related to the process, right? Just a little review on the debrief. It's about process, not content. What about the process in this virtual setting worked well? And then flipping that coin, what next time that we have to meet again, is there anything that we could change, that's within our power to change, to make the virtual process better? And so I think it's critical. As critical as it is in a traditional meeting, the same is true in the virtual meeting. Now, you could have a form already made that somebody just quickly pulls up and you type the pluses and the deltas in that, or you could just simply do it verbally and just say, hey, what worked about this? Can you just take a couple minutes and have your scribe or whoever jot down whatever the deltas might be so that you ensure that you try to work those hiccups through for the next time. The second question that came in was about the group memory. After the meeting, what should I do with the group memory or the charts? This would be something procedurally that you would want to do in setup. Talking to the LEA, what do they traditionally do with the group memory? Do they take pictures of it? You could take screenshot pictures of the group memory and have them saved into the child's file. You could print out, the scribe could print those out and keep them somewhere. But that again, just like in a traditional meeting, those things would need to be decided amongst the whole team, because just as a quick review, remember the group memory is just a visual way to represent or to make the conversation visual. It isn't until you gain the agreements that goes into the IEP document. So if you're doing strengths and challenges, that might go into the IEP document once you get the agreement, or it might already be in there in a narrative form. But would you want to screenshot the actual collaborative work that you did and save that somewhere? Perhaps, but I think that's something that you would have to talk about with the LEA or the case manager or whoever to find out how to deal with that. And the third one was, what suggestions do you have for getting necessary signatures on the paperwork? We chuckle at that because we've talked to so many different people in so many different districts and states and so on, and they're all doing it differently. So I guess the answer to that question is to definitely talk to the LEA. How are they handling it? I don't think there is any direct information from OSEP or from the state, I guess from the federal piece right now, because this is such a new thing. So it would just be finding out whatever the procedure is in that district, and that would be from the LEA.
And things are changing rapidly, as we all know. So that could be,
that's right. Could be talk to a friend of ours that is a director here in Arizona, and she said, we started out doing this. We've done like 20 IEPs already virtually. And we started out where we would just do a verbal signature. So it would be almost like they would just say attended on Zoom or attended on WebEx or whatever in the signature line. And that was sufficient. And then that went through another realm of that didn't work. That wasn't going to be good enough. So then they had their sending it home and getting the signatures through snail mail and having it sent back. So it really, there's no answer to that or direction. I would just say talk to the LEAs at this school site. So with that, on the next slide, I think that is wrapping us up for what we had to share. Let's see, what is our next slide? So as you guys all know, please visit our website, and our information and our emails is also, I think, on the next slide. So you have this information, I believe. So please reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to problem solve with you if you have a facilitation coming up, and kind of work through any specific hiccups that you might have. And then I think the last slide was for CADRE was some sort of a survey. So if you would please do that as well. But I'd like to open it up now to questions or comments and hear how things are going with the rest of you.
Well, this is Melanie. Currently, there aren't any questions. It must have been extraordinarily thorough and
very thorough.
Very thorough.
Trainers extraordinaire.
That's right.
I don't see any hands raised either at this point.
Looks like we just got a hands raised, so I'm gonna go ahead and unmute Catherine Cox to be able to talk. So go ahead, Catherine. You should be live.
Hey, ladies, how are you?
Hi, Kathy. Hey, how are you?
I'm great. Well, I was just going to offer. I put together a set of our standard documents or charting that we do during the meeting that I shared with our facilitators in Illinois. I'm happy to share those somehow with the larger group.
Wonderful.
They're nothing fancy, and you can adjust them to meet the purpose of your meeting or whatever. But I have, I formatted them with click boxes so that you can check things off the agenda and agreement boxes and that kind of thing. So
that would just fabulous, Kathy. Thank you.
Offer that, and you guys can let me know afterwards how to
send them to us. We'll make sure that they get into the hands of CADRE, and then they can do with it to get it out to the people that are on here. So thank you so much.
To the group.
Okay.
Let's see, there was a comment by Joyce to mention the Key to Ed newsletter.
Oh, sure. So we started putting together a newsletter from Key to Ed. Our second edition, if you will be going out on Monday. Through this time of us all kind of being in a stay put situation, we're going to be sending it out every couple of weeks. We just do a little kind of recap of there's like 4 sections in our newsletter. Recap of some things and reminders that we're thinking about, and then we highlight somebody in there. We talk about kind of give a background of one of us and all of the other consultants that we have working with us, and then any links or any articles, anything that we think that is relevant, we'll put in there. And I'll add that Robin and I are in the process of putting together 2 webinars. One is for parents, just they're 5 to 7 minute quick webinars. One is to be addressed to parents, how they can, what things they can do to get prepared for the virtual IEP meeting, because there's a lot of anxiety and stress for them already. And now in this virtual setting, it adds more. So it's 5 quick tips on what we think parents can do to help get prepared. And then Robin's doing one on for the same type of format, but only from the school, 5 tips on how they can get ready for their virtual meeting. So those should be coming out in our next newsletter and will be on our website. So be on the lookout for those.
And please, you guys, send us. We would love to highlight you. I know you're doing great work, and we're so pleased with all of the support that you're giving families and school districts. That's just makes for a great commercial for special educators, and I really appreciate that, and state departments. But also any questions you might have that you want us to research. We want to be your resource right now. We know you have enough going on in your lives that if you want us to do anything for that, we're here for you.
Absolutely.
Any other hiccups that you guys have come across when you're doing your facilitations and just we're like, gosh, I really wish I had done that differently, but I can't figure out how to do it. We're here to problem solve.
This is Amanda. So no hands raised yet, but we do encourage you guys to jump on and share your thoughts. Now's the time. We really want to hear from you, so go ahead and get those hands raised.
Additionally, there are no other questions coming into the question box.
Okay. Looks like Kathy wants to speak again, so I'll go ahead and unmute her again.
Well, this is not, this isn't really something that is necessarily, I don't know that we have a solution for this, but I think we've all probably, if you've done a facilitated meeting through Zoom or whatever, the challenge of parents who do not have great connections as far as internet connection, and that really just give people a heads up that can really slow down your meeting, because I've had to wait several times, sometimes during the meeting several times. They get disconnected, and it may not just be unique to parents, but sometimes it is because they're at home with their kids right now, and some of them really have limited internet access. So just that's something I'd talk with the district about ahead of time to say, do you know what kind of connection the parent has available? Is there some way to help them with that? because it's going to take more time to
Mm-hmm.
wait and for them to reconnect.
And I
That's
think,
a really
yeah, right. I think that's a very good point. And I think that, you know, now that everybody is taking over the internet and everybody's using all of these platforms, things do get fishy. But I think that could be something you talk about in setup as well. What if you get on that meeting, something happens and the parents can't connect? What's plan B? And maybe that should be it is part of it too.
Of course, that's exactly what I was going to say. What's the backup plan? And can you just jump on by phone? And does somebody have a phone number? That was another feedback we got, that the disconnection, and then nobody had really shared what number to call just in case somebody got disconnected. So those are good. Oh my goodness, I wouldn't have even thought of it. Great, somebody said it. So thank you for that, Kathy and Cassie.
Yeah.
And I know some of you are maybe even have the challenge of families with second language, and what are you doing with that, and how are you working through those scenarios? So of course, those are even going to be more difficult, but there are some things that, you know, we're trying to investigate as well. But if anybody has great ideas or something that's been successful, please share it, because I think that's a particular challenge as well as internet. And actually, let me say one more thing to Kathy's point. One thing that Cassie and I by proxy found out was, if you do have a difficult connection, you can sometimes tell the participants to hardwire into their modem. And now that sounds very technical, and believe me, if somebody told me that during a meeting, I'd probably have a heart attack. But that may be something that they can look at ahead of time versus going on their
Wi-Fi.
Thank you, Wi-Fi. So hardwiring may help that connection, but like you said, Kathy, not all parents even have that capability. They may be on a Wi-Fi that they're sharing from the school district in a school bus or something like that. We've heard of neat things like that happening.
And this is Amanda again. Looks like we have another hand raised from Michael McArlen. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Michael. You should be able to speak now.
Okay. Hello. Again from Illinois, and we're using the co-facilitator. This is a lesson learned, is that the facilitator and the co-facilitator have to practice before the meeting. Not many times, 2 or 3 times will work, but you know, you just kind of have to get your timing down, and you have to, you know, be able to understand each other, anticipate each other. But this is when a facilitator and a co-facilitator are both neutral. It was mentioned before that if your co-facilitator is somebody from the district, then I'm going to suggest it's even more important that you would practice with that person so that you have a flow and that you can keep the meeting moving. Again, it's, you know, the process. You guys keep saying it's all about the process. You don't want to get hung up on completing the documents, or, you know, get too hung up on the paperwork piece. So the way to do that is by practice, practice, practice.
Nice. Good.
Great point.
Looks like that's all of the questions. So I'm going to go ahead and say thank you for joining us today. As Cassie and Robin mentioned, your feedback is really very important to us. So please click on the link in the chat box to fill out the brief Survey Monkey and to evaluate today's webinar. We would greatly appreciate it. And please visit our website if you would like additional information. We launched a new webpage yesterday for resources on virtual meetings that you might find helpful as you navigate these new waters. And finally, for updates on new products and to find out what CADRE is up to, sign up for the CADRE Caucus newsletter. So thank you again, Cassie and Robin, and Key to Ed. This was fantastic. And please stay safe, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Lots of fun. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Good to hear from you.
Bye.